The False Prince, Chapter 2. I awoke with my hands tied behind my back and lying in a bed of a wagon. A throbbing headache pulsed inside me, worsened by the jolting of the wagon as we rode. The least Connor could have done was given me something soft to lie on. I resisted the temptation to open my eyes until my situation became clearer. My wrists were tied behind my back with a corpse rope, one that might be used to lead a horse. If it was, then I wondered if the rope was a last-minute idea. Maybe Connor hadn't expected to be taking me by force. Connor should have come more prepared. This thick rope worked to my advantage. It was easier to loosen the knots. Someone coughed near me. Didn't sound like Connor. Maybe it was one of those thug vigils. As slowly as possible, I inched one eye open. The cool spring day had become a bit overcast, but wasn't yet threatening rain. Too bad. I could have used a bath. One of Connor's vigils was at the far end of the wagon looking at the view behind us. That probably meant Connor, the other vigil, were on the seat at the front of the wagon. Another cough to my left. I let my head bounce with the next jolt of the wagon to see where it had come from. Two boys sat there. The shorter one closest to me seemed to be doing the coughing. Both were near my age. The coughing boy looked sickly and pale, while the other was larger and tanned. They each had light brown hair, though the coughing boy's hair was nearer to blonde. He had rounder features as well. I suspected wherever he came from, he spent more time sick in bed than at work, and just the opposite for the other boy. I judged myself to be the blend of the two. Nothing about me was remarkable. I was only a medium height. One of many ways I disappointed my father, who had felt that it would hinder my success. I disagreed. Tall people fit in fewer hiding places. My hair was badly in need of cutting, tangled and dark blonde, but getting lighter with each passing month. And I had a forgettable face, which, again, worked in my favor. The boy coughed again, and I opened my eyes to determine if he was sick or had something to say and was clearing his throat to get our attention. Only he caught me looking at him, our eyes focused so solidly on each other that it was pointless to pretend I was still sleeping, at least to him. Would he give up my secret? I hope not. I needed time to think, and time for some unfortunately placed bruises to heal. Time was not on my side. He's awake! That was the larger boy, who got the attention of Connor's backseat vigil. The vigil crawled across the wagon to slap my cheek, which wasn't necessary because my eyes were mostly open. I swore at him, then winced, and he yanked me into a sitting position. Not too rough, Connor called from his seat. He's a guest, Cregan. The vigil, now known as Cregan, glared at me. I didn't say anything else, figuring the phrase I just used to curse at him had satisfactorily explained my wishes for the cause of his death. You've met Cregan, Connor said, then added, Mott is our driver, been designed to look more different from each other. Mott was tall, dark-skinned, and nearly bald. With light hair he did have was black and shaved at his scalp. He was the one by the tavern who tripped me when I was trying to escape the butcher. In contrast, Cregan was short, not much taller than I was, and shorter than the tan boy near me. He was surprisingly pale for a man who likely spent much of his day outdoors, and he had a thick crop of blond hair that he tied back at the nape of his neck. Mott was lean and muscular, while Cregan looked softer than I knew him to be, judging by the way he clubbed me at the orphanage. How strange that there could be two people so different from each other, and yet my dislike for them was equally fierce. Connor motioned to the boy in the wagon with me. That's Latimer and Roden. Latimer was the cougher. Roden had ratted me out for being awake. They nodded at me, then Latimer shrugged, as if to say he had no more of an idea why we were here than I did. I'm hungry, I said. I plan on having roast for dinner, so whatever you got better be good. Connor laughed and tossed an apple onto my lap, which sat there because my hands were still tied behind me. Roden reached over, snatched the apple, and took a bite of it. One of the rewards for not having fought coming along. I'm not tied up like a prisoner. That was mine, I said. The apple was for anyone willing to take it, Connor said. There was silence for another moment, except for the sound of rodents eating. I stared icily at him, though I knew it'll do no good. If he came from the orphanage as I did, he knew the rules of survival. Rule number one said you took food, whenever it was available, as much as you could get. Neither of you forgot, Connor. I asked Latimer and Roden. Latimer shook his head and coughed. He probably didn't have the strength to fight. Roden leaned forward and wrapped his arms around his legs. I saw the orphanage you came from. It was 10 times the place I lived in. Then Connor comes and says, if I cooperate, I could get a big reward. So no, I didn't fight. You might have given me that nice speech instead of having me hit over the head, I told Connor. What's the reward? Connor didn't turn around to answer. Cooperate first, then we'll talk reward. Roden tossed his apple core from the cart. He didn't even have the decency to eat all of it. You can untie me now, I said. It probably wasn't going to be that easy, but there was no harm in asking. Connor answered, Mrs. Trebeldi warned me that you have a history of running away. Where do you go? To church, of course, to confess my sins. Roden snored and laughed, but Connor didn't seem to find the same humor. I can starve that blasphemy out of you, boy. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, hoping to end my conversation involving me. For the most part, it worked. Roden said something about his devotion to the church, but I let it go. None of it mattered. I didn't plan on being here much longer. About an hour later, the wagon stopped in a small town I'd been to once before. It was named Galvin's. Although as small as it was, I'm not sure it deserved any name. Galvin's was more like an outpost than a town, with only a few shops on the street and a dozen pathetic excuses for homes. Carthian's homes were normally well built and sturdy, but Galvin's was poor and its farms dry. A sturdy home was a luxury few here could dream of, much less afford to build. Most of these thin wooden structures looked like they would be finished in a stiff windstorm. Our wagon had stopped in front of the shack with a small sign over the doorway identifying it as the Galvin's Charity Orphanage. I knew this place. I'd stayed here several months ago, after Mrs. Trebeldi temporarily kicked me out. Connor took Mott with him and left Cregan to guard us. As soon as Connor left, Cregan jumped out of the wagon and said he was going to get a quick drink in the tavern, and he'd personally kill any boy who tried to escape. Another orphan, Ronan asked. Connor's probably been to every orphanage in the country. What could he possibly want with all of us? You don't know, I asked. Latimer shrugged, but Roden said, he's looking for one particular boy, but I don't know why. He won't want me, Latimer's voice was so quiet. The snorting of a horse nearly drowned him out. I'm sick. Maybe he will, I said. We don't know what he wants. I plan on being whatever he wants, Roden said. I'm not going back to the orphanage, and I've got no future on the streets. Who is Bevan Connor? I asked. Do either of you know anything about him? I overheard him speaking to the master Grippings, who runs the orphanage where Roden and I lived. Latimer mumbled. He said he was a friend of the king's court. King Egbert? I shook my head. Connor's lying, then. Everyone knows the king has no friends. Latimer shrugged. Friend or enemy, he convinced Master Gripplings that he was here as a service to the king. But what does that have to do with us? I asked, a handful of orphan boys. He just wants one boy, Roden reminded us. The rest of us will be cast away as soon as we become useless to Connor. He said as much to Master Gripplings. Let me make it easier on you, I said to Roden. Untie me, and I'll be on my way. That's one less boy to contend with. I'll do no such thing, Roden said. Do you think I want to be punished for your escape? Fine, but the knots are really tight. Could you just loosen them? Roden shook his head. If they're tight, it's because you irritated Connor's vigil and you probably deserved it. Connor wouldn't want him to be hurt. Latimer crept toward me and said, Turn around. I can't maneuver with my arms behind me. Just reach back there. Latimer stretched an arm across the back, which I caught with my hand and twisted behind him. Roden jumped to one knee, startled. But with my other hand I slipped a noose over Latimer's neck and pulled it so tight it was nearly tightened. Roden froze, waiting to see what I'd do next. Getting the rope off my wrist had been an easy matter. Knotting it into a noose was a bit trickier, although now that was not the time to admire my handiwork. Roden didn't look impressed with my behind the back knot tying. Clearly, he'd never attempted something like that before, or he would have been. Or maybe he just didn't want me to strangle Latimer in front of him. Not an inch closer to me, I warned Roden, or else I'll dump him over the side of the car and you'll describe to Connor the sound of his snapping neck. Please don't do that, Latimer breathed. Roden sat back down. I don't care if you kill him. I don't care if you run away. Leave if you want to, and pray Connor's vigil don't find you. I stood, apologized to Latimer for threatening to kill him, then gave a ceremonial bow to Roden. The bow might have been a mistake. Midway through standing up straight, Cregan whacked me in the back with my flat end of his sword. I fell forward, all air knocked from my lungs. You know what'll happen to me if I let you get away, boy? Cregan snarled. I knew, and I wasn't entirely opposed to it. You said you'd kill anyone who tried to escape, Roden reminded him. And so I will, Cregan said, banging his teeth when I turned to look at him. He'd replaced his sword with a knife and leapt into the wagon in 2 steps. I rolled over to make a run for it, but he grabbed my shirt, shoved me back down, and pressed the knife to my throat. Master Connor doesn't need all of you, and I think he needs you least of all. Suddenly, I had a motivation to be needed by Master Connor. Okay, I grumbled. You win. I'll cooperate. You're lying, Cregan said. I often lie, but not about this. I'll cooperate. Cregan smiled, pleased to have humiliated me. He placed his knife in the sheath of his waist, then yanked me up by the collar and tossed me into the corner of the wagon. We'll see. A minute later, Connor returned to the wagon with Mott and a boy walking beside him. I squinted, certain I recognized him. He was tall and usually thin. His hair was darker than mine and Roden's, but he was stringy and straight and more in need of a trim than mine, if that was possible. The boy climbed dutifully in the back of the wagon. Connor glanced at my untied hands, and then at the thin vein of blood trickling down my neck. He eyed Cregan. Any trouble? None, sir, Cregan responded. Only I believe you'll find Sage to be more cooperative now. Connor smiled as if that was all he needed to know of the matter. I'm glad to hear it, boys. Meet Tobias. He'll be joining us in our quest. What quest? I asked. Connor shook his head. Patience, Sage. Patience is the mark of a ruler. And that was my first clue about why Connor had taken us. We were all in terrible danger.